I'm Aaron Meyer with co-host The Chucker. This is the 19-9 podcast. On to the show.
Jim, isn't it amazing when Michigan can keep this game?
Today, The Chucker and I go deep with Doug Brunk, the author of several books on Kentucky basketball, including 40 Minutes to Glory and Wildcat Memories. The podcast is produced today by me, Aaron Meyer, and presented by 19-9 as a part of their ongoing celebration of the history of hardwood. If anything represents the history of college basketball, it's Kentucky basketball. They're easily identified as the bluest of blue bloods, representing the winningest team in the history of college basketball. Our guest Doug Brunk knows the identifiable uniforms, the best teams, and everything in between. He has a special affinity for the 1978 squad who represented UK after Rupp and won Big Blue Nation their first championship in 20 years.
The first person I interviewed for the Wildcat Memories book was Dan Issel, who to this day holds the record for the most points scored for the men's basketball program. Oh. And we met in Los Angeles, and during our interview, I asked him to reflect on what it was like to play for Adolph Rupp. You know, we've all heard the stories of how much he was a taskmaster and kind of had a hard edge about him. And Dan, he kind of paused the interview, reached back. He's a 6'9", imposing figure. And we were in his office, and he reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet, and he began to read. He pulled out this kind of typewritten text from a small piece of paper, and it was a few lines from Teddy Roosevelt's famous "Man in the Arena" speech about the importance of learning by doing, the idea that it's better to stumble in competition or other areas of life by giving your all than doing nothing or by sitting on the sidelines and criticizing.
Doug might not have been born in Kentucky or live there now, but you can tell it's in his blood. Kentucky basketball isn't just a game, it's a salve for tough times, a way to connect with a community, a way to reconnect with their youth. It's a cornerstone of hardwood history.
But it's like the 1998 Final Four MVP Jeff Shepard told me, he put it this way, he said, the fans refer to themselves as we, meaning Kentucky fans. They'll say things like, we're not rebounding the ball enough. You know, they might maybe watching the game on a TV 100 miles from where the game is being played in Rupp Arena, but they consider themselves a part of the program. And he, in his view, they are. You know, they're invested so much emotionally, and these are fans who camp out for tickets to Midnight Madness, the debut of college basketball in October. They literally pitch tents out around Memorial Coliseum, rain or shine. So just really an unprecedented, I think, passion. Some would say obsession, but healthy obsession.
I'm not going to keep you waiting any longer.
So with that, Doug Brunk, thanks for joining us here in the 19-9 podcast.
Thanks for having me, you guys. It's nice to connect with kindred spirits to talk some college hoops.
I think Aaron and I always like talking college hoops, so we're glad to have you on here.
Favorite.
UK, as I said, welcome to the 19-9 family, and this is a great way to really kick that off and really celebrate and discuss Kentucky hoops. So we're thrilled.
Great.
So, Doug, let's kind of start here. Just doing some of my background on you. You're a guy with a master's degree in magazine journalism from Syracuse. You live in San Diego. So how do you come to write a pair of books on Kentucky basketball? And where does kind of your interest from that subject come from?
Well, it goes way back to my elementary school years. In the summer of 1973, our family moved from Rochester, New York, to Wilmore, Kentucky, which is a city outside of Lexington, which at that time had a population of about 3,500 people, one of those two stoplight towns. And my dad accepted a job as director of development for Asbury Theological Seminary in Wilmore. And I was 7, an impressionable kid whose favorite sport was basketball, so it wound up being a great place to grow up. And it didn't hurt that the Cats were a pretty good team at that time, with stars like Kevin Greavy, Bob Guyette, and Jimmy Dan Connor. So I started to follow the Wildcats because the games were carried on the local TV stations, and radio stations, and there were no pro teams in the state for any sport. So, but importantly for me, that the team became a point of conversation in elementary school. I was classmates with kids whose parents worked in agriculture. Some raised cattle, others worked on tobacco farms. It was a world that was so different than Western New York State, where I had moved from. But talking about the Cats with my classmates helped me to form social connections at that young age and feel a part of something. And as a Kentucky fan, there's really no boundaries of race, religion, socioeconomic status, and I came to really appreciate that early on. So fast forward to 2011, as an 80th birthday present to my dad, he and I flew from San Diego to Lexington to watch the Cats play St. John's in Rupp Arena. And it was December of that year. And that team had Anthony Davis and would go on to win the title in 2012. And on the plane ride home, I remember kind of reflecting on my passion for the program. I know this was like a father-son trip, but I thought of an idea for a book. And that idea was to interview some of the program's greatest players and coaches and ask them to reflect on who influenced them the most while they represented the university, whether it was a fellow player, a coach, a teacher, or a perfect stranger. So I put together a proposal and sent the idea to the University Press of Kentucky, and the result was the book Wildcat Memories, which you talked about earlier.
That's incredible. So give us a little bit about your basketball origin story. So you talk about connecting. Did you play basketball too, or was it just something that you enjoyed engaging in the culture of basketball?
I did. I had played a bit of basketball before our family moved from New York to Kentucky, but I played my first organized game in the gymnasium there at Asbury Seminary in Wilmore, which has a tartan floor. It's kind of like hard rubber surface.
Yeah.
Easy on the knees. I learned, and I could use that today actually. So I'd go there to shoot around, and eventually got to know some of the seminary students who allowed me to play 5-on-5 with them. And thinking back, I think maybe they took some pity on me or prayed that I wouldn't be a ball hog, but they welcomed me. And so when our family moved back to Rochester 4 years later, I played 3 years of high school basketball,
Nice.
including a memorable senior year when our team finished the season with a winning record for the first time in more than 10 years.
Oh, wow.
It was a big deal. It was so fun to be a part of that.
So you guys weren't the Kentucky of Rochester is what you're saying.
Correct. So back to the Kentucky influence though, when I made the freshman basketball team in high school, it became apparent that I'd be a forward center because of my height. So I requested jersey number 53 in honor of Rick Roby from that 78 team, who was, if I was going to model after somebody to, box out, set screens, get rebounds, he was the guy in my book. So,
no doubt.
And I continued to play the game recreationally in college, and I still play pickup to this day.
Yes.
A couple days a week.
That's great to hear. I love it.
Yeah. Thank you.
You mentioned as well, Doug, I mean, going on this trip with your dad for his 80th birthday back to Lexington, was there kind of a dynamic between you and him? Is this something you shared with him, and that's part of the passion for basketball, the love for basketball? Is there a connection there as well?
It was. We absolutely watched games together, not only when I was growing up, but as I became an adult and relocated back to San Diego, where my father passed away late last year. But we would always try to watch as many games together as we could, or I would, if I wasn't going to be able to join him, I'd at least give him a heads up. I said, Dad, Cats are on channel 8 tonight at 4:00. Make sure to tune in. So we absolutely shared that together, and we saw 3 Kentucky games together.
And, so let's kind of dig into some of these books, Doug. So in your first book, Wildcat Memories, you really take a deep dive into the unique, dynamic world of UK hoops. As you said, you're talking with past coaches like Tubby Smith. You got players ranging from Dan Issel to John Wall. So, for those who only know Kentucky hoops from a distance, how would you characterize Big Blue Nation? What makes it kind of so different, so unique?
I would say the tradition. Kansas is closing in, but Kentucky remains the winningest program in the history of the sport. And, that's a big mountaintop to be on, but the four championships Adolph Rupp won as coach really put the program on the map in terms of excellence and expectations. And you hear Cal talk about that today. He understands what came before him. And, there's a lot of responsibility to carry that on. And I think it's the same today because people who grew up in Big Blue Nation households pass it on to their children. And the devotion goes back generations, I think, to the very start of the program in 1903 for some families. And, devotion also runs deep for programs like Notre Dame and UCLA. But what makes Big Blue Nation different, I think, is there are no professional sport teams within the border of Kentucky. So no NBA team, no Major League Baseball, NFL, NHL. So residents, they are generally either cheer for UK or the University of Louisville, with few exceptions, I think. They get emotionally invested, I think, more than other fans do. I think Kentucky fans take that passion and loyalty to another level. They're the type that are going to lose sleep over losses, even during the regular season, not just in the Final Four or something. But it's like the 1998 Final Four MVP Jeff Shepard told me. He put it this way: he said the fans refer to themselves as "we," meaning Kentucky fans. They'll say things like, "We're not rebounding the ball enough." They might be watching the game on a TV 100 miles from where the game is being played in Rupp Arena, but they consider themselves a part of the program. And he, in his view, they are. They're invested so much emotionally, and these are fans who camp out for tickets to Midnight Madness, the debut of college basketball in October. They literally pitch tents out around Memorial Coliseum, rain or shine. So just really an unprecedented, I think, passion. Some would say obsession, but healthy obsession.
Yeah, I mean the Kentucky fans travel too. Even living in Southern Indiana, somehow I feel like half the people around me are Kentucky fans too. The closer you get to the border too, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, and then there's the who's who of star athletes who have represented the team in the past several decades, and that's kind of another conversation. But I think when you're remembering guys like Frank Ramsey, who was sort of the prototypical sixth man off the bench for the Boston Celtics, and kind of created that role, back playing for Red Auerbach, to Pat Riley, to Jamal Mashburn, to Rex Chapman. It's just kind of a who's who of really phenomenal players. And Kenny Walker and John Wall, DeMarcus Cousins, Devin Booker. So the list goes on and on and on.
You can keep going. You can keep going, I'm sure.
It's overwhelming.
So let me ask you this then, because you get into a project like this, and it's ambitious to do a book on a team, because they're, even as a fan, when you take it to that level, just us doing the podcast here, and we start looking into these teams, we unearth all these different nuggets. So what were some things that surprised you about talking to the players, or just maybe some stories that you unearthed that you're like, man, I'd never heard that before?
Well, that's a great question. I learned that for some players, the impact of playing for Kentucky is just as strong, meaningful as following the program is for fans like me and millions of others. For example, the first person I interviewed for the Wildcat Memories book was Dan Issel, who to this day holds the record for the most points scored for the men's basketball program.
Wow.
And we met in Los Angeles, and during our interview, I asked him to reflect on what it was like to play for Adolph Rupp. You know, we've all heard the stories of how much he was a taskmaster and kind of had a hard edge about him. And Dan, he kind of paused the interview, reached back. He's a 6'9", imposing figure. And we were in his office, and he reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet, and he began to read. He pulled out this kind of typewritten text from a small piece of paper, and it was a few lines from Teddy Roosevelt's famous "Man in the Arena" speech about the importance of learning by doing, the idea that it's better to stumble in competition or other areas of life by giving your all than doing nothing or by sitting on the sidelines and criticizing. So he read a few lines to me, and actually got a little teary-eyed, and then folded up the paper, put it back in his wallet, and I was like, man, it was one of those moments where you're like, talk about impact. All these years later, for his celebrated NBA career as a player and coach, for him to be carrying around that in his wallet.
Yeah.
I just knew at that point, I knew I had to do the book, because if that's showing up here, there's got to be other stories of impact elsewhere. So that was a big one for me.
That's great.
I'd never heard before. So.
You mentioned interviewing Issel, again, a legend in the UK program. You mentioned kind of the rough edges around Adolph Rupp. I'm curious if you had like a favorite interview for that book, because you interview all these people, and I think sometimes you go in and you say, you know what, I think this person's going to give me information on X, Y, Z, and maybe it veers off in a different direction. So who really kind of stood out to you and maybe was more engaging, more telling, more compelling, or, just kind of really insightful that maybe you didn't quite expect, or who gave you information that really was very enlightening for you? So what kind of really stands out as you did all these interviews? What individual?
Well, if it's okay, I'll talk about a couple of them, and actually I'm going to have to go back to Dan, because another huge surprise to me was that he revealed that he was so homesick when he first arrived at UK as a kid from a farm town in Illinois that he considered leaving. In fact, the athletic department at that time assigned a young Lexington couple to look out for his well-being. They called it. And the couple's name was Armand and Joyce Angelucci, and Mr. Angelucci became a lawyer and wound up being a circuit judge in Fayette County. So he was a pretty prominent guy. But at that time, they'd have him over for meals, Dan, and to watch football games on Sunday. And Dan told me he just didn't like the dorm life. It was a little too much for him, needed some quiet. And more than once, they talked him out of leaving altogether. And I just think, you just look if you ever look in the record books, there's Issel in almost every category: rebounds, points, assists, percentage. He's in the top 10. So it's the UK record books would look so different had he left. And you just wonder, it's one of those what ifs. What if that had happened? And the other guy who was really great to speak with, I mean, they all were in their own ways. Roger Harden, who's a former Indiana Mr. Basketball. At the beginning of his sophomore year as a point guard for UK, he found out that his girlfriend was pregnant with who would become his son. So you think about that in the early 80s, they just the tremendous pressure of that weighed on a 19, 20-year-old kid. And he opened up to me about the people who helped him accept and embrace that responsibility of raising a son while playing for UK, and I just had, I was just in awe of how he kept that all together and was a huge star. Big time assist. He was right up there with John Wall in terms of dishing the ball out to his teammates for his era.
For sure. Okay, I got to know, just listening to that, what kind of insights did they give you to the coaches? Because I feel like coaches in college basketball often play an outsized role, especially, you're talking about young men here. And I just wanted to know what you found out about the coaches and talking to the players.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people a lot of the guys I talked with had played for Coach Pitino, and just talked about how he gave them, was hard on them, but gave them opportunities that they did not expect. So there was that, you work hard, you're going to get rewarded with at least an opportunity to show me and or the team what you have. So it was that, that was a consistent message that I got, and how much he cared about his guys off the court. And same with Coach Cal. Patrick Patterson told me that it was just refreshing from his experience with Coach Billy Gillespie to have a guy that really liked bringing the team around his own family into his house and just to hang out, let them, game or watch movies together, enjoy their pool during the summertime, that kind of stuff. And same with Coach Hall. I heard a story from Kyle Macy, who was the starting point guard for the 78 team. There was a break between Christmas and New Year's, and he couldn't get home, but he was really sick. And Joe Hall let him stay at his house, and his wife he and his wife kind of looked after him while he got over the flu. Just that kind of stuff. I guess really embracing the kids as one of their own was a consistent theme. And you probably hear this at other schools too, but it was nice. It was a consistent theme I heard.
Yeah, the theme, you do hear it, but I think it's worth telling the little stories around it, because we forget as fans, I think, how young these guys are. And it's part of what makes it interesting. It is something that you have to overcome as a young person, moving away from home, getting all new teammates, because all these guys were superstars in high school, and then they're going on to Kentucky, and a lot of them don't find that same experience. And there's just a lot to navigate.
Yeah, you're right.
All right, I want to talk a little bit about your second book. Then you hinted at one of the players there. It's 1 year before Magic and Larry, and it's kind of this transition time for Kentucky. You've gone from Rupp to Hall, and it feels like a transition time for the NCAA too. But what made you kind of want to take a deep dive, or motivated you to take a deeper look at this team in particular?
Well, there were a couple of reasons for that. One, I considered Coach Hall and every player on that team as a hero when I was a kid. And I was 12 when they beat Duke, and remember doing a somersault over our living room couch to celebrate. And but as I got older, and tried to be more objective about that, I began to appreciate just how solid this team was. And it was really stunning when I had the opportunity to do this book. There's just bullet point after bullet point I could share with you, and that team really had no glaring weaknesses in any position. It had Mr. Basketballs from 6 different states. 6. And to me, they played ball the right way. The physical, fundamentally sound, strong team leaders in Roby and Givens, and solid chemistry. and they set screens. And most of the time they grabbed rebounds with two hands. That's a pet peeve of mine. And it was a pet peeve of Coach Hall's.
Yeah.
And they shared the ball and arguably had the best free throw shooter in the country in Kyle Macy at that time, a prolific scorer in Jack Givens, and an exciting monster dunker in James Lee. So it was really the whole package.
Doug, there's this saying, you mentioned how influential that team was for you, as you were, a young guy. And there's this saying that you should never want to meet your heroes because sometimes they can disappoint and you realize the humanity in them. And so here's this team that you held, kind of on a pedestal as a young guy. And then you meet them all now as a grown man. And what was that experience like? Did it deliver for you, or were there things you had to reconcile, or what did you, as you kind of dug into this team that you have such fond memories of, how did you kind of navigate that? And how did you kind of feel about the team after you were kind of done with the book?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was, I tried to listen to my journalism professors as I put this book together and tried to keep as much of not only myself, but my perceptions about this team out of it as I told the story. And I, looking back, I think I did a decent job. I guess I'll leave that for the critics, but it was surreal because I had the opportunity. We hoped the idea was to have this book published in time for the team's 40th anniversary celebration in Lexington, and it worked out. It was available a couple of months before that happened.
Sure, the publishers were happy about that.
Yeah. Well, what was fun is there were certain events. The team was celebrated, introduced during halftime of a Kentucky game. Got a huge round of applause, and there were a couple other events over the course of the weekend where I got to meet everybody and sign that book with those guys on the team. It was unbelievable. It was really humbling. I had met some of them working on the Wildcat Memories book, but certainly not the whole team. And it was just it was a true honor, and to help them tell the story and have them tell me what do you want people to know most about this team. That was a question I asked everybody from the Wildcat mascot to all the managers and all the surviving players and coaches. So it was a surreal experience, but probably the most rewarding project I've done to date. Just because and then your listeners may be aware that this past March, the SEC Network aired an hour-long special on the team called Win or Else, and I was so glad to see that because I thought in my mind, I'm not a film producer or screenwriter, but I always thought this team deserved a special like that, and it's really well done if you get the chance to see it.
Yeah.
So I want to stick with this, Doug, because you said something really interesting there about you were asking folks who were involved with the team, what's something you want people to know about this team? Was there kind of a common theme that kind of emerged from that?
Definitely. This team was led by 4 seniors, Jack Givens, Rick Roby, the late Mike Phillips, and James Lee. And they were laser focused on ending their career as national champions. And what's unique is they had pretty much accomplished everything else a college basketball player would want up to that point. So as freshmen, they lost to UCLA in the championship game in 1975, actually here in San Diego. As sophomores, they won the NIT tournament in New York City. As juniors, they lost a heartbreaker to North Carolina in the East Regional Finals. So they narrowly missed a spot going to the Final Four. So for them to finish their careers as national champs is a testament to their determination and resilience. So that story of overcoming all sorts of internal and external pressures, external from the fans in particular, to bring a championship home after a 20-year drought everybody talked about that that I interviewed, and what's great is one of the things that makes this team special is there has not been a 20-year drought of national champions at Kentucky since this team. So the one before, the last one had been 1958 and then 78, but there hasn't been a 20-year drought since that time. So they kind of set the standard back up, I think.
Yeah.
So.
That's really a statistic that just kind of shows the success of Kentucky program throughout decades and throughout generations. I mean, you'll find teams that were, maybe really successful in the 50s, but then they kind of disappear. Really successful in the 70s, but then kind of disappear. Really successful in the 90s, but then disappear. And it's kind of amazing. Kentucky does have these ebbs and flows, and they have their down years. Last year being a notable one for them. Yeah. But for the most part, it is just pretty consistent winning there in Lexington.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
That said, so here's a question about this team then. So they're 30-2, number one most of the season, 4 pros on the team. You mentioned Jack Givens and Rick Roby, all Americans from all over the country. And yet it seems like it's more of a footnote. I'm glad to be bringing some more attention to it here. And I watched the documentary, really do like it because it has that nice story arc too from the freshman year. John Wooden's last game is kind of worked in there. I mean, there's a lot of amazing moments worked into the kind of arc of this team, but I feel like it's not known by as many. So I'd like to hear kind of your take on why that is.
Well, one reason I think is that ESPN would not debut for another year. So I believe it was Kyle Macy who told me this during interviews for this book. He said, had it been a year earlier, I think more people would have known about this team, because you look at what happened the following year with the Magic and Bird, Indiana State, Michigan State. That was hyped, and ESPN was carried coverage of that almost. Well, it was well covered, I should say.
Yeah, and they beat Magic to get to the title too here.
That's right, and we the Kentucky team limited him to, I think it was 9 points in that game, and he was averaging 17 as a freshman, so that was impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think another thing is the chemistry. They were so balanced that they didn't have just one star, and they kind of just did their thing. They were laser focused. They had fun off court, but they weren't stupid fun, like getting themselves in trouble, making headlines for the wrong reasons. So that might be another reason why you didn't hear about them too much.
Yeah.
They're
like consistent, right? Like they go out there,
yes.
get the job done, but maybe not in the way that gets them that type of attention.
Correct.
And Doug, you talked earlier about Adolph Rupp. You talked a little bit here about Pitino. One of the really other kind of notable coaches in Kentucky history is the coach of that team, Joe B. Hall. So what stories did you come across with him, and what do you think made him kind of special or distinctive as a coach?
Well, Coach Hall grew up in Cynthiana, Kentucky, which is a small town not far from Lexington. And he was captain of his high school football team. And so he was a multi-sport athlete growing up there. But what I came away from this project with was even stronger respect and admiration for him than I had before. And I say that because you look at the Duke game, with the championship game, with 35 seconds left on the clock, he inserted every one of his reserves who had not seen much or any playing time to that point. And the Cats were only up by 8. And I want, how many coaches would do that today? And so I asked him, what was behind that, and he told me the reason he chose to do that stemmed from his own time as a Wildcat. He played for Coach Rupp 2 seasons in the late 1940s. And Rupp would not play subs, that the team could be up by 20, 30. And he said, that stuck with me, Coach Hall told me. And that, to me, that says a lot about his character, because he was like, man, I want to provide those kids with what I missed out on.
Yeah.
He's thinking about these players who, put in the grunt work as reserves, and gave him that moment. It may have been 10, 15 seconds, but I think that's awesome. He's also special because he didn't crack under pressure following Rupp's retirement in 1972.
Give us the quick setup about, because I think this is, as an Indiana fan, and maybe soon Duke fans will find out, North Carolina fans are finding out, following a legendary coach is not an easy task, and stepping into that, and just the time and era that he had to bridge to, I think was a unique part of his coaching tenure.
Yeah, absolutely. It helped him tremendously that he was a player and an assistant coach for Coach Rupp before he became the head coach. But there was, he wasn't treated so well by Coach Rupp. In fact, after his sophomore year, he transferred to Regis College in Colorado and got more playing time. And but you know what? He got a call from Coach Rupp, who invited him to join his coaching staff after his playing days were over, and Coach Hall was trying to get his own coaching career off the ground, and he accepted. And I think there's I'll share an anecdote that I read. Coach Hall penned his memoir a couple years ago, and there's a scene in there. When I read it, I just couldn't believe it. So think of this young kid from Kentucky. He's a freshman. He's in Lexington with his parents standing in the street outside of a hotel, and it's game day. And Coach Rupp happens to walk by, and young Joe Hall says, "Coach Rupp, I want to introduce you to my parents." And according to the book, Coach Rupp just walks by, doesn't even acknowledge him. And I'm like, oh man, I don't know how I would feel. I mean, put yourself in that situation, so, and then fast forward to this opportunity when, as not being treated so well by Coach Rupp, he still was thinking of the bigger picture in opportunity. And the most important thing with Coach Hall is imparting to his players that when you play for Kentucky, you're playing for the Commonwealth, everybody in the state. It's not about one player, not about one coach, and that sort of thing. So he really instilled that when he took the reins. So that's another thing that's special about him. He took great pride in that. He scheduled scrimmages at high school gyms in small towns throughout the state that would never otherwise, some people would never otherwise be able to see the Cats play live. Made the teams sign autographs for hours, scheduled appearances at charity events, and visiting people in the hospital and nursing facilities, that sort of thing. Just really reminding them that it's not all about them.
Yeah, I'm wondering.
Reminding the players that it's not all about them. And I think that's, and you see a lot of that in Coach Cal too. And one thing I really admire about Coach Cal is how he is really how well he's treated Coach Hall and kind of he has served as his mentor.
I wonder if some of those differences between Rupp and Hall that you were mentioning, maybe even a little bit of the tension there, helped him, or gave him license to change, because he changed some of the approaches to Kentucky that Coach Rupp had, and just watching documentary, knowing a little bit about the differences between them. I wonder if that was an impetus for some of the things he was able to try out, like you were saying, to modernize it in some ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the one thing that I think he inherited that some of the players would tell you that they didn't care for was he would go on tirades during practices, but he was trying to send a message.
Yeah.
I think they understood that, but it was just hard to weather.
Yeah.
From what I gather, and that's just how it was. That was his style. But in terms of impact, really, I don't think there's anybody that kind of is more representative of what Kentucky basketball is all about and should be than Joe Hall. Yeah. Just he's really dedicated his life to that, not only that program, but the betterment of the state as a whole. So
cool legacy. Okay, I'm gonna put you on the spot here. You got 8 national championships, 4 in the modern era: 78, 96, 98, and 2012. Where are you stacking up the 78 team in those 4 championships?
Whoa, a lot of talent.
I know, right? Yeah, I know.
Well, I think the guys on the 78 team would definitely be hanging with any of those squads.
Yeah. But
the context, they played in an era that's almost unrecognizable to today's game, even between 78 and 96. There was no shot clock and no 3-point line, but the 78 team had guys like Jay Scheidler and Tim Stevens who consistently made shots from downtown. And one statistic that was imparted to me that in putting this book together, this team, so at the end of the 78 season, they averaged 84 points a game, shot 54% from the floor, and made 75% of their free throws. And those are stats you don't see a lot of that these days.
Yeah.
And that was before the 3-point line. So I think, you can argue at speed and athleticism, some of those other teams might win the contest, so to speak. But I think more than anything else, I think of them as a reset button for the program. As we were talking earlier, that 20-year drought, there hasn't been one since, and you can arguably credit those guys. And they were also the first team, importantly, to win a national championship with Rupp Arena as the home court. The first with African Americans on the roster, which was huge.
Yep. And
among the first teams to play 2 6'10" guys at the same time in Roby and Phillips. So just a lot of. It's unique. It was a whole package team.
Yeah, still to this day, I think free throw shooting is the thing that translates for draft picks to 3-point shooting in the NBA. So there's no doubt that those guys could have shot threes had the line been there.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, the Chucker would put his money on the 96 team. not that my vote matters.
He jumped right in there with that. He's like,
but
all
that
right,
96 team, as great as 76 was, as great as 98 was, as great as 2012 was, the 96 team was just stacked upon stacked upon stacked. So I don't know how that stacks up among the Kentucky faithful, but that 96 team was pretty amazing.
That was absolutely.
So let's kind of end it here, Doug. We've talked about kind of the culture of Big Blue Nation and UK basketball and kind of how you came to write these 2 books. We talked about the 78 team specifically. Do you have any more Kentucky Wildcat books on the horizon? Sometimes you dig so deep into a subject and you kind of become tired of it, and you're like, I don't know if I could do another one. There's more to write here. So are there more Kentucky Wildcat books on the horizon for you?
There is, as the pandemic started, I got kind of restless, like most everybody in the world, wondering how I'm going to spend my time. And, writers just have to tell stories, and I reached out to Jack Givens, who was the star of that and the co-captain of the 78 team, to ask if he would be willing to work with me on his memoir. And he took a couple months to think about it. And we've been working on it since August of last year.
Wow, that's great.
And he has a really important and inspiring story to tell, and I'm really looking forward to sharing it. It's going to be a ways away. It will be published by the University Press of Kentucky, hopefully in March of 2023.
Nice. That's great. It's just kudos to you for being willing. I love that there are fans that are willing to dedicate the time and energy to dig deep and to bring out those type of long form stories still, because it just feels like they're going away in some ways, and then you hear about people doing the good work, and it's exciting.
Well, thanks for saying that. And it is I consider it a real honor to. I know that word gets thrown around a lot, but that's how I view it. It's really, I figure if I'm interested in it, there's got to be a lot of other people who are interested. So I'll kind of go on the hunt. So.
Well, we had an Indiana fan reading about Kentucky, so it's got to be at least halfway decent.
Well, it's interesting. I think anybody who's a fan of college basketball, I mean, Kentucky just looms so large in that discussion of college basketball programs that it's hard. I mean, I think to understand college basketball is also to understand a bit about Kentucky and kind of how it sits at the nexus of so many different transformations from integration, racial integration that is the players, to the one and done era more recently. Kentucky, reading about Kentucky history, like I said, I mean, I think it really kind of gives us it's an interesting lens into college basketball's evolution as well.
Thank you for listening to the 19.9 podcast. If you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, make sure you do. And while you're at it, leave us a rating or review. 5 stars only, like the basketball camp. We also have links to all of 19.9 social media so you never miss a release. Until next time,